Good afternoon. This is Briefing with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan on KJDB.com. That is KJR Radio. You can find us every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KJR's Rumble channel, their Facebook page, and their Twitter feed. And today, for the first time, you will find us on YouTube. I am on YouTube now, so you can go to KJDB, their YouTube channel, and you'll find the show broadcasting there for the very first time. And so I had to kind of update myself on the language that gives you problems with YouTube, and hopefully I'll be a good boy and avoid all those words that the algorithms don't like, and hopefully not get us kicked off. Yeah, hey. And now today's show, I got a great guest. Robert Lucero is coming on. He's running for the 34th district in Los Angeles. It's a U.S. House of Representatives seat. And, he followed me on Twitter, and I checked him out, and I found out that he was a moderate Democrat. And I looked over his website, and there's a lot of things on there that I agreed with. Now, I'm a Republican, but I'm a moderate Republican, moderate on social issues, a little more fiscally conservative when it comes to the money stuff. But I saw some of the stuff, and here's the thing in Los Angeles or in California, I've talked about this whole duck and cover thing up in Sacramento, which is why I really wanted to talk to Robert, is in the state, if there is something controversial and we have a moderate Democrat who can't support it, they just don't vote on it up in Sacramento, which I think is, it's cowardice. I don't like it. If you're a moderate Democrat, if you don't like something, vote no. Don't just not vote, right? But that's been going on in the state, which tells me that a lot of moderate Democrats, if they feel threatened, they're not going to say anything because they don't want to get the left side of their party angry with them. They don't want to get primaried. And so when you have a strong moderate voice that's willing to speak up and lay out their positions as forcefully as Robert is on his website, and hopefully we'll listen to him today, he can lay it out what he feels, then you got to give him a platform. And that's really what I wanted to do. But before I get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on with ICE in Portland and Chicago. Now, I got to contrast what they're doing there in Portland and Chicago, and that would be Illinois and, of course, Oregon, in comparison to what we did in California and Los Angeles. So Los Angeles was the first place that Trump deployed the National Guard, and there was a lot of wringing of the hands and gnashing of the teeth about how terrible it was. But we really did have some violent protests going on in LA. It was in a small section of time, but it was violent, and it was awful. And we were slow to respond. Our local law enforcement was slow to respond because there wasn't good communication and coordination with the feds, which everybody acknowledged. And so when Trump sent in the National Guards, it kind of laid down the gauntlet for our local leaders. Either get your city under control, or I'm going to send in the National Guard, which he did. And ultimately, our local leaders faced the reality. They had to stop the rioting. They had to stop the violence. They had to stop the looting, which they did. I think the LAPD did a great job. I think the Sheriff's Department did a good job. And also, I have to call out the CHP. They took a lot of rocks and bottles, and the men and women in the CHP did a fantastic job too. But let's hear the Chief of Police of Los Angeles talk about what's going on, just so it gets framed correctly.
This violence that I've seen is disgusting. It's escalated now since the beginning of this incident. What we saw the first night was bad. What we've seen subsequent to that is getting increasingly worse and more violent. Tonight we had individuals out there shooting commercial-grade fireworks at our officers. That can kill you. And we have adapted our tactics to be able to have a chance to be able to take these people into custody and to be able to hold them accountable. We are overwhelmed as far as the number of people out there engaged in this type of activity and the type of things that they're doing.
What is your position on the National Guard being deployed? Do we need them here?
We have tremendous capability here. To say that we would go to that right away, I'd say we wouldn't have been there yet. Looking at the violence tonight, I think we got to make a reassessment.
Yeah, and so I mean, after Jim McDonald, and I know Jim, and he's a great guy. He did I think the LAP, like I said, once they were allowed to do their job, did a fantastic job. But in LA, we deal with a network of leftist organizations, nonprofits, that whenever they don't like something politically, they go on the streets, and some of them are not nice guys. They are violent. Anytime there's any anti-law enforcement stuff, they show up. They show up with helmets, face shields, masks, shields. They're not there to do nonviolent. They're not there for nonviolent protests. They're there to confront. They're there to fight. They're there to resist. And unfortunately, some of the language used by our leaders encouraged this until the troops came in and they made the right decision to let the LAPD, the Sheriff's Department, and the CHP suppress the riots, suppress the worst aspects of the riots, hopefully get to a point where just protesters can come out. But you know, once they started dealing with them, everybody went away. We saw prosecutions by Nathan Auckman of some of these guys. That's their local DA here. And we saw prosecutions by Bill O'Saley. He's the U.S. attorney of some of these folks who are committing violence against ICE officers. And it all calmed down. Now, a reason why I bring this up is because I think ultimately the leaders in LA and in California realized, okay, we have an obligation to maintain order in our streets. Even if we don't like what ICE is doing, we have an obligation to make sure our citizens are safe, that property is being protected, and the violent protests are not to be tolerated. And I think LA got there, right? I think LA got there. I think California got there. But looking at what is going on in Portland and Chicago, or Cook County, Illinois, and Portland up there in Oregon, I don't think they figured out. They passed laws that they can't do anything. And until recently, we haven't seen any activity in Portland by the Portland Police Department to suppress the worst aspects of these protests/riots in Portland. They've been going on for months, where they've been attacking the ICE facilities. And I think we have a video. Let's show the video for Portland.
Look at this. This lady arrested right here. Get out of here.
That's good enough, Amanda. I think everybody got a flavor of what is going on in Portland, Oregon there. Now, if you were watching the videos, you saw a lot of people with helmets on, face shields on, and gas masks on. They're wearing all black, a lot of them. Now, this is a relatively mild version of what has been going on in Portland, Oregon. There's video clips of them using the commercial grade fireworks, as the chief in Los Angeles talked about, was used against the LAPD. And this has been going on for months, where they were throwing rocks and bottles at these guys. And obviously, this is the the feds. This is the first time they've had to get used to this. This is usually stuff that was done to Portland, the police department or the sheriffs up there. But now the feds are getting a little taste of it, and they don't like it. And they're going to send some National Guard folks up to Portland, and they're going to clean up Portland. And of course, Trump has said he's going to do the same thing in Cook County, Illinois. And we saw some of this kind of behavior in Cook County, Illinois as well. Just outside of Chicago, they seized a couple of guns off some of the protesters. Now, they're not there for nonviolent protests. Now, I've handled, I don't know, 100 protests. And most of them, the people come, they express their point of view. They're nonviolent. I may not even agree with them, but you know what? They understand what their obligations as a citizen are, and that is to speak their mind against government policies, to say what they think, but to do it within the confines of the Constitution and not engage in violent behavior. I do think the folks in Oregon and Portland and Illinois and Chicago face a decision. Are you going to go down the path of LA and just recognize that you have an obligation to keep the peace on the streets, even if it is in front of a nice facility? Yes or no? And if you're not, you're going to get visited by the National Guard. And I think that's unfortunate. I think they took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and part of that oath is to do their job and keep the citizens, and that includes ICE officers, safe, and they're not doing their job. So I would think that they would take a look at LA and realize that, hey, this is not a battle we can win politically, nor is it's contrary to our obligations as politicians in our respective cities and states. We need to do our job. Anyways, I do a shout out to all the folks and the men and women in law enforcement who are taking the rocks and bottles and taking the guff. Hang in there, guys. Hang in there, guys. I've been there. It's rough. You just keep doing your job. Stay within scope. Do the best you can. Don't get goaded into any foolish behavior by these protesters, because that's what they want. And like I said, my prayers go out to you guys, and good luck. And to the leaders out there, take a note from LA. Just clean up your streets and let the rhetoric happen on cable news and on social media, but not out on the streets with the violence that was going on at all of these places. Okay, that's my lead segment for today, and I want to bring on Robert Lucero right away, because I think we have a lot of good stuff to talk about. And Robert, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Chief. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I always let the guests talk about my lead segment, good or bad, whether you want to or not. Any comments on what's going on with all of this foolishness? I give you a moderate. You're probably, this is a balance thing that these guys got to get into. But what's your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. No, there's a lot. So I actually have been talking to various people in law enforcement, public safety, so fire and police. And so without naming, names and such, and even precincts, I've spoken with some precincts in my district, leaders in these precincts. And one of the questions I asked them is, I said to one lead officer, I said, so let me just ask you, you talk to people or you listen to the news about LA, let's say going back a month, and the big complaint was Trump's a dictator. He sent in the National Guard, and we didn't need that. So from Newsom down to Mayor Bass, everybody says we didn't need them. And this officer said that's not true at all. They said, this person said, I was at the protests in 2020 with George Floyd, and I was at these protests this year. These were far worse. They were using military grade weapons against us. We were any backup we could get, we wanted. So that's one thing. I had also pointed out that if we, in fact, did not need anybody to come in, why was it that the federal building was attacked and defaced and all that before the National Guard wrapped themselves around it? By the way, this is all in my district.
Yeah.
Everything we're talking about is happening in the heart of LA, the 34th Congressional District. And as someone who is, I tell people that when I win this race next year, I will be the first member of Congress representing this area, the heart of LA, that's actually from here, that has roots here, multi-generational. I'll be the first one since 1993, when the legendary Edward Roybal had to retire from Congress. He was a man who was elected to Congress in 1962, literally a Kennedy Democrat in that election, President Kennedy's midterm election. And he was already known on the city council in the 1940s and 50s as a very strong, independent voice. So, for example, these people who come in and say, we're with the brown people, we're against ICE and all this stuff. I say, well, wait a minute. First of all, you just got here from the Midwest somewhere or from Portland, and let us who've been here for multi-generations talk about it and at least have a voice. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. Let's at least elevate other voices too, like mine, that, in my case, my grandfather and my father were both at the march in 1970 to end the disproportionate deployment of brown and black draftees in Vietnam. So we've been on the ground going back generations. This is mi tierra, as we say in Spanish, right? So, and I told the police chief at a public meeting at the Hollenbeck precinct that I was 100% behind the police, that I understand that they're kind of caught in the middle right now between all the political forces,
yes.
And they're not being given the resources they need.
Yes.
And look, one of the problems they have, which we can get into on the homeless problem, is the dispatch situation. People complain, well, they didn't come. I called and I was standing there with a situation. One of the police told me, he said, look, you're talking about homelessness. He said, we get called for a mental health emergency on the streets. Someone is clearly having a breakdown. So we could go, takes us a while to stabilize the situation, make sure it's all safe, safely get that person without hurting themselves and others into the car, get them rolling to the psych ER at USC, and then we have to sit there like a lot of emergency rooms in a triage situation and sit there for hours. So now you have 2 or 3 police officers, because it's not just one guy down there, right? So and then what's dispatch supposed to do? You got 2 or 3 of these going on, you might be shutting down half the precinct that night, right? So, or more. I don't even know the numbers. So they're clearly undermanned. And what they need from us, somebody running for Congress, is to say, look, there's no case where we should say public safety is number one, quote unquote, but we don't have any money for it. You know, where's the money? Where's it going? So a member of Congress, we share in having the power of the purse, and we can use that to great effect.
And I guess I'm going to just roll with this conversation. So we're going to go read in some law and order stuff. And, I do believe in block grants and given to locals, but it has to have strings attached, because right now, when you look at the city of Los Angeles, you look at San Francisco, the left side of the spectrum has narrowed the approaches that we can take to solve disorder in the cities. We've rejected broken windows things. They have rejected broken windows. They've rejected those things that have worked in the past. And in reality, like I talked to you a little bit in the green room about my experience in providing programming in the LA County jail systems. They don't believe that anybody ought to be rehabilitated in the jail system. It all has to be in the community. And what that tells me is, if the feds are going to step in, they need to really narrow those block grants where we refine what we know works, and we expand it to those common sense approaches that have worked in the past, and reject the very narrow approaches that I'll say the leftists support when it comes to criminal justice reform, because I think they're failing us, and they're failing us in all of our major cities. So if when you win, I'd love to see that kind of expansion of what is allowed to be spent, and narrowing the stuff that doesn't work on the left, and then looking for those common sense things that have worked in the past, and those things that have real promise moving forward in criminal justice reform, because there are some things out there that we can look at that I think would work. Drug courts that we've had in the past, just expand those. But your thoughts on how you could impact crime as a legislator?
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind right away. So we people may not know this, but we're ahead in Los Angeles of New York City on having the Democratic Socialists actually run government or mismanage government. So we have 4 members of the city council openly who are members of the Democratic Socialist movement here. Everybody you talk to, almost everybody you talk to in business leaders circles, small businesses and other community people just say this has been a disaster. So I believe that my sense is that the Mamdani victory in New York City, that clearly to me is coming, will be the high watermark of the DSA. And so I'm hoping to be part of the rise of voices of sanity in the Democratic Party in the new midterm election season. Because most people you talk to on the street, we've talked about, in my view, MAGA is about 20% of the country. And, the radical woke is between 15 and 20%. The majority, 60%, are in the middle trying to figure out where are the same voices, where are the people who know that we've actually solved some of these problems in the not too distant past. So what you have here in LA is a lot of disorder because people like to pass the buck. They like to say, because the city is so dysfunctional, what can I do about this or that? Our representative, our incumbent congressman here, was asked at a town meeting a couple of months ago. They had, rah, rah, anti-Trump, rah, rah, get ICE out of LA, rah, rah. And so when all that was done at the rally, 10, 15 minutes in, well, what about homelessness? What about the streets being dirty? What about the disrepair in the streets? Every one of those questions from the report that I got, the incumbent said, well, that's not my jurisdiction. That's the city, and basically pushed it off to the city. So my answer to questions like that would be, well, what neighborhood are you talking about? And because I know that council person, my office is going to call their office and see what they need from me and from the county to solve those problems. A unity of government effectiveness. People don't like Trump. They didn't like Elon Musk, bringing in, an efficiency movement. Well, then let's get the job done ourselves. I've compared it to a parent telling, 3 or 4 kids, hey, clean your room. They come back in an hour, it hasn't been cleaned. Clean your room. Okay, if I have to tell you one more time, I'm going to do it. You're not going to like how I do it. They don't do it. Dad comes in, cleans it, throws half the stuff away, and they're all crying, right? So I'm like, if you don't want daddy to come in and you don't like to hear it that way, then clean it up yourself. Board of Supervisors, City Council, So they may not answer a direct question you gave me. I apologize, but
That's okay. What I'm hearing is,
yeah.
it's not working, so I'm going to try and use my power to suggest courses of actions by our locals. But you're right. When things are failing, it's the shell game of blame. Who's going to catch the blame here? Who's going to get the P that's to blame there? And that's what's been going on here in LA. You saw it with Bass. I don't know what you think of her. I think she's kind of Democratic Socialist herself, and you see that to some degree with our governor shifting responsibility and blame whenever it doesn't suit him politically, and that's a recipe for failure in terms of leadership. And so that's why I enjoyed our conversation on the phone, and I had to bring you on. But let's talk a little bit about, homelessness, because well, wait a minute. I want to talk about your roots with JFK, because what I really liked about is you went back and looked at JFK. I got a video that I want to roll here. Let's roll the video, Mananda.
You're right. If you look at John Kennedy issue by issue, and if I could just digress for just a moment before I mention the other harm the conspiracy theories do, look at John Kennedy issue by issue. A muscular anti-communism, just like Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. A belief in the conquest of space. He said, we shall do it first. We shall do it best. We shall send a man to the moon made of a rocket of materials not yet even invented, and we'll do it first. He believed in counterinsurgency warfare and special forces. He believed in low taxes. He believed in confronting our enemies, confronting communism. What's left-wing about those?
That's right. I have a theory, and I'd love it tested. Give 100 college students, I don't care if they're at Harvard or at a local community college, give them the Kennedy inaugural address and ask them, was this given by a Republican or a Democratic president? And I'll bet they'll all say Republican.
I think you're right. In many ways, his image has been hijacked. John Kennedy would not have recognized the late 1960s. What happened to America between 1963 and 1969, John Kennedy would have thought was a travesty.
Tell me this.
I would have been outraged to see.
I can't believe I'm asking this because it's not the purview of the book, but I really adore what you're saying.
I'm happy to say it.
All right, so let me ask you this. Do you think, this is the $64,000 question among people who think about these things, do you think that he would have prosecuted the war in Vietnam?
We don't know, but I do think we can't say he certainly would have not. A number of people claim that they're certain he would not have done it. We don't know. He had already sent almost 20,000 men to Vietnam. We don't know which way he would have played it, but I think it's incorrect to say that we know he would have pulled out.
Exactly. God, I can't believe it. You're good.
All right, so that's it's the author there, The End of Days, and Dennis Prager, obviously the conservative guy, talking about John F. Kennedy. And as I looked at your website, I saw that you are a student of history. You look back at history. You obviously look at the things that they had. Here's your website, Robert Lucero, for Congress, Democrat for Congress. And those who don't study history are bound to repeat it, is kind of what I was thinking of as I read your website and I saw the inspiration that you had for some of your policies. And so you seem like you have a kinship for John Kennedy. Let's talk about your relationship to the family. Do you have a relationship with the family as well? I think you worked for RFK. Yeah. And it is important for us to look back at history and try and understand what our leaders were trying to do and maybe revive some of those efforts. So.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a privilege to be connected to the family, and I won't overstate my relationship to the family. I will say that what happened was in 2018, I've been a student of President Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy Sr. for a long time. But an opportunity arose in 2018 when I was running a small podcast that's buried in SoundCloud called New Deal Radio. And I started it on April 12th, 2018. April 12th is the day that Franklin Roosevelt died. And I wanted to talk about the tectonic events of 1968. So it was somebody who was born in 1973 trying to figure out, well, what happened in this critical period before I was born, so that I can try and relay that to my peers and the younger ones, right? And have honest conversations with people who were either there or who've written about it. So long story short, as we got to Memorial Day in 2018, we were approaching the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Robert Kennedy Sr. So an article came out in the Washington Post that Bobby Kennedy Jr., it said something like Sirhan Sirhan is in prison for killing Bobby Kennedy. His namesake doesn't believe he did it. And so it was about Bobby Jr. having gone to visit Sirhan Sirhan and coming out of that meeting in his prison cell for 2 to 3 hours. And he came out saying, Sirhan Sirhan did not kill my father. And there was a second gunman and all this stuff. And he pointed to Paul Schrade. So long story short, or longer story, even shorter, I called the Washington Post, got that author on my podcast the next day. And he connected me to Paul Schrade. So I get to say that the same man that introduced Bobby Kennedy Sr. to Cesar Chavez in 1965 introduced me to Bobby Jr. in 2018. Because Paul and I developed a great little friendship in his last days. He passed away a couple years ago, but Paul Schrade was a UAW VP. He was the leader with Walter Reuther out of the UAW in Michigan. And Reuther had sent him out to California to help these upstart farm workers. He said, help them get organized. So so Paul had he'd known the Kennedys since the mid 50s. He said he didn't like them when he first met them. He thought they were these rich upstarts, and he didn't, But then he came around to President Kennedy, and of course, after the assassination, everybody's figuring out what are we going to do. So he started bugging Bobby in 65 saying, you got to come out here and meet this kid, Cesar. You got to come see this guy. You got to come help these people. And so you might have heard there's a sort of famous flight to California that the senator from New York is on. He's like, why am I going to California? And well, Paul's been bugging me. I got to go out there. So Paul's the one that dragged him out to meet Cesar Chavez. And without going into all that, Paul was standing at the podium in California on June 5th, 1 a.m, when Bobby gave what ended up being his last public remarks. They walk into the pantry, and Paul was 6'4", walking behind Bobby. And so when the shots rang out, he was one of the first ones hit. It hit the top of his head, and he fell to the ground. He basically says, and Bobby himself, Bobby Jr. goes through this on a podcast. Actually, there's a basement podcast he did with Bill Maher where he talks about this in some detail. You can find it on YouTube. So I'll skip the details. But there was a second gunman that killed him from behind. The coroner's report says it all. So I got connected to Bobby through Paul. And so I came to him from a policy side and was one of the first people on the campaign. I worked with Dennis Kucinich to set up a lot of the processing of volunteers into different parts of the campaign. I'm a fundraiser, so we did a lot of fundraising work. And I ended up being one of the last people I think I wrote his last international policy tweet on August 15, 2024. So I was involved in a lot of stuff from beginning to end. And, it's great to be connected to him. And honestly, I think he's doing great work. I'll defend a lot of things he's done. I can't say I understand or agree with everything. I would never go hiking in a thick pair of jeans in Arizona in 110-degree weather.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have done that to the bear and other things like that.
Well, what I come away with RFK Jr. is he's an honest, well-meaning guy. That's what I come away with. I don't know if I agree with everything he says, but at this point I'm willing to put my trust in him. And I think, and that's what you need with the politicians need us to trust them until we can't trust them, right? But the interesting thing about when you looked at history and you're a student of RFK Sr. and JFK is that you looked at their policies and you tried to understand them from a policy standpoint. And I talk about policy on the show all the time, and that's what I really appreciated when I looked at your bio. And before we get into some of the big stuff that JFK was talking about in terms of the water projects, let's talk about homelessness. And as I told you, I'm sitting on the board of the LA Mission. In fact, I had a conversation with the CEO yesterday. We're having a big gala here in October, and I had to work out some details with them. But what do you see as the path forward for LA for homelessness and actually California in general? Because you're going to be advocating for all of California, certainly your district, but LA, but all of California when it comes to homelessness. And I think the big policy that everybody's been pushing is housing first. I think that's been a failure,
right? And
I think we need to tweak that and adjust that. And I don't think that there's a political will at this point to challenge that in the Democratic Party, but it has to be challenged. So what's your vision?
Well, I'll tell you three quick things on it. The first would be sort of to set up where things are right now and what the current elected officials seem to be so proud of. So there was a press conference in MacArthur Park, again, right in the heart of my district. MacArthur Park, a place that used to be beautiful in the 1950s and 60s, that even as early as the movie Falling Down with Michael Douglas, it was already a mess, right? You know, it was already becoming a dystopia. So it's 30 years later and it's just worse. The press conference was held by Mark Gonzalez, who's a friend of mine, but he's now the assemblyman for that district, former chair of the LA County Democratic Party. So he was there. Mayor Bass was there, and and they had people from USC Medical there. So a lot of the people that you need to get something really good done, they were there to proudly announce that Representative or Assemblyman Gonzalez has a bill in Congress, or excuse me, in the state legislature, AB 538 or something like that, that is called street medicine. So what they're going to do is they're going to take these USC folks and have them treat people where they are, find them where they are, treat them on the street. Now, do I believe in first aid? Of course. You got to help people. I've said that actually from the beginning. Some of these people need immediate medical attention. There's no question. You look at them. They also need immediate intervention for psych issues and drug addiction and so forth. But they're stopping at the feel-good idea of treating people where they are, meeting them where they are. They even said in the riverbeds, we're going to send the medical teams into the riverbeds. And I'm thinking, I would like to talk to these people that are going to be sent, off camera and see what they think of this, with no police, right? Because we don't like the police either, right? So, I mean, I don't want to pick on these guys. I really don't. But you have to say, this is just awful. Then there was another thing that came out. I forget if it was a nonprofit. I think it was a nonprofit. I think it was city connected as well. And it was in the LA Times. And they're going to go out there. This is separate from the homeless, but they're going to take giant Band-Aids, I kid you not, like this, and put them on sidewalks that have ouchies on them, right? So instead of repairing sidewalks, we're going to go out there. So the second part of what I wanted to say is that we don't even have to reinvent the wheel on this thing. So last year, even Gavin Newsom recognized that the Supreme Court last year during the campaign, we were all distracted by the presidential campaign. The Supreme Court ruled that encampments can be taken down by cities. So even Gavin Newsom backed that up, right? So that's the Supreme Court. July 24th this year, the executive branch, our presidency, whatever you think of the incumbent, our presidency put out an executive order on July 24th called Ending Crime and Disorder on America's Streets. And in it, it says we have a crime, but a medical emergency, psychiatric emergency, drug addiction emergency on our streets across America. Now, to my knowledge, that's the first time a president has said that in decades. Okay. And we need it said. What was also exciting about this is that the president tasked not just the attorney general and law enforcement with enforcing existing laws, which is the most easy part of this thing, the easiest part, but he also tasked the HUD secretary and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Mr. Kennedy, with addressing this addiction issue, this mental health crisis on the streets. And at the end of it, they said there's no new appropriations for this. It's just using existing monies, et cetera. So my thing is, okay, that's two branches of the government of our three branches that took definitive emergency action on this thing. Where's the Congress, right? Congress could say, we see you, Mr. President, and we're going to raise you by funding it and supporting it. What's the partisan part of any of that? It all makes sense. It could be done. So what I wanted to add to that, the third component is I'm a member. I've been a member for a long time and a supporter of the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank. So this takes the model of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation that was started under President Herbert Hoover, but then used by President Roosevelt during the New Deal era to directly fund, first after stabilizing certain banks and certain companies, to fund all the great projects that we're so proud of, the Hoover Dam, the Bay Bridge, the bridges in the Bay Area, the Tennessee Valley Authority. These are projects that the Chinese came to study after World War II and said, okay, we want to do this in China. We need to do this on our rivers in China. We need to do this for transportation. So now they have what we used to have, construction armies, building their infrastructure, and we're sitting here twiddling our thumbs. We have no national policy on infrastructure, not a single one, right? So my last thing I'll tell you is my policy is to create a genuine New Deal, a nonpartisan, bipartisan New Deal centered in this crisis that's in LA. Because again, we have 9% of the population in California of the US, but we have 30% plus of the homeless, right?
Yes.
So we have the emergency based here. We, at the end of World War II, a lot of my relatives, people got the GI Bill benefits from having served in the armed forces in World War II, in Korea, et cetera. It's still given to people who serve today. However, instead of we don't need another war. I used to run into people who say, we need a good war. What if we say people between the ages of 18 to 25, maybe 18 to 30, you sign up for 2 to 3 years of a Civilian Conservation Corps WPA type enlistment in fixing our infrastructure, which includes, bridges and all that stuff, but also soft infrastructure like healthcare, right? And providing emergency services for these folks on the streets. And you will get GI Bill type benefits to reduce your student debt, pay for your college if you haven't gone yet, help you get your first home, help you develop a business, whatever it is. Because this young generation shooting up schools and whatever else they're doing, this is a generation that doesn't feel connected to this country. Yes. They don't feel ownership, okay, to understand where they are. And I'm going to do more to try to understand where they are, right? Is they just feel like there's no hope. And so they lash out with one thing or another. So I'll cut it there, but I just wanted to add that to the mix.
Yeah,
here.
a couple of things. I want to dovetail onto that, and then I'll go back and talk about the use of the criminal justice system with homeless way. I think it's important. It's been rejected, but one of the things to get back and talk about Kennedy and his relationship with other politicians from other parties, and you saw this with Dole and Bush, is they all served. They served in World War II. They were asked to step up and do the right thing. And as I listened to you talk about your Peace Corps idea or Service Corps idea, we have not challenged our young people to do something for somebody else, beyond themselves, other than be radicalized and protest. I mean, that's what our nonprofits are teaching. If you get right down to it and look at it,
right? Throw a fit.
We give money for them to protest against climate justice and all kinds of different justice things, but we're not giving them the tools to actually accomplish things, which drives me crazy. So I think challenging the younger population. Hey, you have an obligation as a citizen to do something beyond just take and expect. And so I like your idea, because I think that lays that out. But
it's national too, because I actually had the privilege. I'm an Angelino, but I've had the privilege of working around the country, and I find the steps to the student union at the University of Michigan to be a sacred spot, where President Kennedy stood as a candidate and announced his Peace Corps idea just in the middle of the night to all these students that were there. And I know that young Michiganders, young people in Ohio. I remember meeting a kid at Youngstown State, and we had a table set up with some signs about rebuilding steel mills. And he said, "Man, that's all I want to do. I mean, I like college, but I just want to work in a steel mill like my dad did." These jobs that we used to have, we had them in LA. We had a Bethlehem steel plant in Los Angeles, in Vernon.
we used to have a car manufacturing plant, GM.
Right.
In Van Nuys. I remember that when I first moved here. Yeah. I mean, I'm from Detroit, so I was like, oh, they got a car plant here, and then it went away, right? And we saw the gutting of our manufacturing for the last 20 or 30 years, which is why I like some of your infrastructure, Bill. But I think when it comes to the homeless thing, what I'm talking about is, for a lot of the folks, there needs to be some hook to bring them into the system. And I always called it a bridge into treatment, or a roadmap into treatment. One of the last things I worked on before I retired was a rapid diversion program. You gave people citations on Skid Row, and they went to court, and they were given an option. You go into the jail system, which was not scary to them. Many of these guys had been in jail before. They were only looking for a few days or a week in jail. So it wasn't like they hadn't been there before. Or we'll give you treatment. And we had a mental health professional that would evaluate them, see if they were appropriate. And then we had a navigator that would put them in a program. And that pilot grew to 7 courthouses and 92% success rate over the last, because it started, I've been out for about 5 years. So it started about 6 years ago. And that's pretty good numbers. And there's 2 reasons why that works. Is one, we had the hook, criminal justice system or treatment. And the other one, they made a decision themselves instead of having a decision thrust upon them. They made a decision themselves. They wanted something better. And so that's why I think that's a high number. And when you look at those realities, 'cause right now the kind of left says, no, we're just going to push them all in here and we're going to cross our fingers and hope that it works. That doesn't work. The other thing is when I was working, I was sent on everything. I was on the Bail Reform Commission. I was on the Homeless Commission. Because I was doing programming in the jail, they put me on every one of these commissions. And I tell people, guys, I'm Republican, right? And they would just chuckle at me. And I'd say, oh, and here's what I noticed when I was dealing with those folks. Because like I said, they only allowed for a narrow set of solutions that weren't going to work. And somebody who's a public policy guy like me knew on the face, this isn't going to work. When they were exploring bail reform, they said, well, let's tweak the tools so that we push all these other things out because those might be racist. Well, you know what? Age, joblessness, there's a lot of things that go into why you take a risk on somebody on bail reform, and they wanted to ignore that. Well, then that's not a tool. That's just, so, and it was the left driving those tools and driving those decisions. Even it was an aide to actually Mark Ridley Thomas looked at me and goes, these people are crazy. I go, yeah, they don't, they just want an outcome, and they want this, the veil of respectability that we put them through a process. And that's what's going on in the state as well. So I think with homelessness, there needs to be a hook, whether it's the Hoover Institute, the Independent Institute, it's the MacArthur Foundation, every single one of them says success in dealing with the homeless is there has to be a hook to get them into treatment. And that will work. The other thing about it is we stopped doing the war on drugs, and the drugs are killing our homeless people. It's just we have to stop. They're open door drug markets. We have to stop the dealers from operating in the open door drug markets so we give some of these guys a chance to recover. Because as long as there's cheap drugs, they're just gonna keep taking it until they either die or somebody save them.
And you could see there was a slogan a couple years ago in Orange County. Make crime illegal again. But that's what LA County voted for in voting for Nathan Hochman, our new DA. So people do want laws enforced, and there is, people do want. You have to distinguish, because people say, well, what about Amsterdam? They got so much freedom, and you actually look into it. No, they don't. You can't just do drugs and have prostitutes everywhere. If you're out there doing that in the park where the kids are, you're going to go to jail, right? And that's what we don't do in San Francisco, in LA, or we haven't been doing. I know there's a revolt in San Francisco against this. They've even had a decent revolt up there. So yeah, once again, like your clip talked about with Kennedy, I actually had a quote from the inaugural address myself, because I actually think if you go back and read that inaugural address from 1961, that's still, to me, a lot of it is a roadmap for where we could go again in terms of the younger generation and so forth, and how he did inspire people. And I've also told people, look, I was with Bobby Jr. at the Nixon Library, where Bobby was invited to speak, and he gave a great statesman-like speech on policy. That's what we need again, is that Nixon and JFK actually weren't that far apart from each other. Part of the reason the election was so close in 1960, right? You think of all the things that President Nixon actually accomplished and why he was such a popular president before Watergate, right? It's really worth thinking about.
Yeah, I we only got 10 minutes left, but I want to get into one policy issues, and then I just want you to talk about where you would like to go when you're elected. Is I want to talk about nuclear energy. One of the things that I've jumped into with the fires out here is our energy policies in California, and they really narrowed the only two energy sources that we're allowed to have in California moving forward by going zero net carbon by 2045 is solar and wind. And there are so many other excellent renewable resources, that energy sources that we can use that we are not allowed to use in California, because it doesn't. I guess the green mafia, I call them the green mafia, they won't let us use them. And one of them is big hydro. They won't let us do that. But the other one is nuclear, which I think is critical. And you talked about a plan that JFK had, and I think we need to reevaluate the use of nuclear. I mean, France gets 70% of their electricity, I believe, from nuclear. I think Illinois gets a ton from nuclear, but we can't do it in California because some powerful people won't let us do it. What are your thoughts on nuclear? And if you have time, some big hydro.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's water and power. It's water and power. It has to be both. And look, the fires tell you a lot about that too.
Yeah.
The idea that we don't have enough water here, we should have plenty of water. And that starts with desalination. There's other projects we can use. There's a Delta issue that I have a water expert advising me on. where on that issue, and again, I don't know the full details, but according to her, Governor Newsom is right on the Delta issue. I mean, he's getting right. He's moving to the middle on a lot of these things.
Yeah. He's migrating.
He's migrating like a school of fish, right? So
yeah.
No, nuclear. I won't pretend to be a nuclear scientist. That's for sure. My degree's in public administration, which I do think is a serious subject, but it's not nuclear science. But I'm pro-nuclear for the same reason you described. That France is they're actually now at about 66% because they had agreed to diminish their commitment to nuclear down to 50, but they've actually and that was in 2015 that they made that commitment, but they've been actually rolling that back every couple of years because they're saying actually that ends up messing us up quite a bit because we got to build new plants, we don't have enough, and these green technologies don't do it, right? As we know. So no, a modern economy must have a lot of energy, a lot of throughput of energy, and a lot of consumption of energy. So the whole, conservation / green movement is actually a problem because not only in the first world, but what we used to call the third world, the idea is, well, we consume too much over here in the first world and you can't have it either. So lucky for us, in a way, China's ignoring that. And they're saying, well, we'll help you, Africa. We'll do what America should have done after World War II and help you get out of darkness, in terms of just basic electricity. Brazil, same thing. They're going to build a transcontinental railroad across South America now, is what I'm hearing. So it's infrastructure. I was telling people that I had my son the other morning as I was combing his hair. He's a fourth grader. I said, spell infrastructure for me. Dad's always talking about infrastructure, and he spelled it out and got it right. So, it's my big thing. Just in terms of, like you said, water and power, California should be leading on firefighting and water management instead of saying, oh, this caught us flat-footed, who's to blame? And Karen Bass recently saying, we feel good about where we are. We're ready for fire season. And I've talked to the firehouses. They're saying, we've actually cut firefighters. We're low then, we're lower now. And I hate to say it, a lot of these guys have given up. They're so beaten down. They're just trying to get out, do their time and get out. And it's truly, heartbreaking. They also spend way too much of their time on calls involving the homeless, 911 calls. So I actually think the nuclear case has been somewhat closed for a long time, meaning it is the direction we should be going. Obviously, fission with a bridge to fusion. And the quote I had from the JFK inauguration was just very short, where he says, "Let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depths, and encourage the arts and commerce. Let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free." That's how we thought in 1961, or that's what we were doing, right? And that should have been the world that the baby boomers carried out, and then my generation, the first offspring of the boomers, Generation X, would have had, that kind of world where we would be pushing that envelope further. So I'm a hopeful candidate. One of the things I want to do in LA is make it fun again. This place is so depressed and so dystopian. And I think we can have a lot of fun with this campaign, sort of reviving this kind of justified optimism.
Yeah, I moved from the Midwest, and when I graduated high school, there wasn't a lot of opportunities in 1980 in Michigan, Detroit, Michigan in particular. And I moved here in 81, and the thing that I got in LA was, even though we had a high crime, because we did, and we had other problems, there was a lot of hope. There was still a lot of optimism. And there was a lot of good things going on in LA, right? And I felt it, coming from the Midwest, because that was in the Rust Belt, things are dying. And in California, they were still growing, even though we hadn't gone through the shutdown of the aero defense industry yet. We hadn't gone through any of that kind of stuff. But we always had new industries popping up. And one of the reasons why I bring up the energy policy is we are losing a lot of industry because they just can't afford to operate here because of the cost of electricity, the cost of fuel. And I don't think our policymakers get just how devastating that is to our business communities. So use this as an opportunity. I think we got about 4 minutes left. Let's talk about how you would support business, small business, big business in California as a representative in the House.
Well, one of the things that I think is really critical in my district, and it would be kind of a good example of what could happen in many more places, including Detroit, is you need more local banking. You need more community banking where people in communities know the banks. In fact, there's one, oh gosh, I always forget his name, this comedian from the 1960s before Richard Pryor. But he basically said, it was a Black comedian, it'll come to me. He said, Gregory.
Gregory, yeah. That's it.
Dick Gregory.
Dick Gregory, yeah.
Dick Gregory said, and again, this is a quote from him talking about the Black community. He says, I don't want to hear about the Black community until we have Black banks, Black hospital, Black this and that. And it's worth thinking about because even Nixon actually funded an all-Black city, an experiment in the Carolinas, the Soul City they called it, and said, look, let's help this. I forgot why it didn't work, but he tried. My point being community banking, not necessarily racially, defined, but if you don't have ownership of your own community through banking and relationships with the local banks, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have a hard time with making it work for small businesses and such. We have more local banks helping small, medium-sized businesses, including, as you know, from the Midwest, medium-sized skilled labor. So machine shops and other folks that can actually produce again here. You need that to come from local banks that understand the community, that don't just go by either a credit rating or more than that, they actually have a connection to the community. And the international banks that are behind Bank of America, Citibank, who really don't care about what happens in the community. I hate to say, they're more concerned about international markets, their relationship to the Federal Reserve, and keeping that multi-trillion-dollar bubble going, right? So I'm big on bank reform, and I got to say, the idea that what people say in the Democratic Party is, well, why don't you wait your turn, Rob? Why don't you're a nice guy and everything, but why don't you run for a little bit of office here and there? Because we have a process. Well, Maxine Waters is the ranking Democrat on the House Finance Committee. And I just have to say, I'm not sure what we're getting from that fact. I mean, seniority on the committees, you need that. Well, why? What are we getting from that? Why?
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why, like I said, I wanted to platform you because you're a strong, moderate voice and you're a young voice, right? In comparison to me, or 11 years younger than me. So, and that's the kind of leadership I think we need in the Democratic Party. Here's the thing. I'm a political science major. I did study a little bit of public administration as well. And I believe in two strong parties. And right now, I think, the Democratic Party is weakened because it's narrowed its approach and it's narrowed its policy options, and it's not connecting with the American people. But we got about a minute left. Robert, go ahead and give your campaign pitch, and and I hope to have you back in the future. So you got about a minute.
All right. Yeah. Well, that paralysis in the Democratic Party is definitely something I'm taking on. And as I said, my view is that the Zohran Mamdani campaign in New York City is very fascinating. I call it Pied Piper politics, that he's just created a situation where he's going to win. But I think that's the high watermark of this DSA movement. And I believe that 2026 will be a new chapter in American history where the moderates will take the country back and hopefully provide all levels of government the tools to start to solve our problems. So I also believe that Los Angeles could use some real voices in leadership, that even if when I win, I'm not necessarily the ranking Democrat on various committees. I think the ideas can actually help guide the conversation, because today, as you mentioned, we're just rudderless and we can't be that way.
All right, Robert, thank you for joining me on the show. Stick around for a quick debrief. That's what we do in law enforcement. That is Briefing with the Chief here every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KJRA and now on YouTube. And I don't think we said any bad words today to get us kicked off YouTube, so that's good. Anyway, catch us next Wednesday. Robert, stick around. Let's have a little brief conversation before we let you go, okay?
Thanks so much.